are listening to the Game Informer Show. This is a special edition podcast. It centers around Tomb Raider, which is our newest cover, and there's been obviously a lot of excitement about this cover story online. It's a bit of a reboot of the entire Tomb Raider franchise. Today we're lucky to be joined by a couple guys from Crystal Dynamics who have a really big role in making the game. Carl Stewart.
Hello.
And Carl is the global brand director. And Tim Longo.
Hi.
And Tim is the franchise director. I'm also joined, obviously, by Megan Marie, who wrote our story, did a great job on that, and Matt Miller, who was also on the trip and is pretty familiar with Tomb Raider as well. But basically, the idea of this podcast is we had people on our website submit questions. We just wanted the fans of Tomb Raider to be able to kind of pick your guys' brains about the direction that the series is going. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Megan, and we are going to just put you guys' feet to the fire.
Rapid fire some questions. We had a fantastic turnout on the website in our call for questions. A lot of things that people want answered. So I'm excited to get through these. So we'll just start right away.
A lot of people excited about Tomb Raider.
Yes.
So that's
excellent.
great.
So the amount of questions makes us somewhat nervous.
I think you guys are definitely the foremost experts, though. So we're in good hands.
I suspect the people listening to this podcast are a friendly audience. I think a lot of people are eager to hear whatever they can learn about the project. So
that being said, we apologize if we can't answer your question. We tried to break them down into general subjects and cover all topics, but the turnout for the questions was impressive, so we had to be a bit selective. That being said, we'll start with a slight doozy of a question, one that we kind of had. We heard this a couple different ways, but Zebra3 asks, between the new and darker imagery, story, and general tone, the game is a radical departure from the previous Lara Croft adventures. Can this still be called a Tomb Raider game? And similarly, Charugai asks, while characters have personality traits, I feel their history and their decisions are paramount to their character development. Without Laura's 1996 through 2008 history, how do you propose you'll convey that this is the character we know and love? So those are just two general questions about the reboot that the fans are looking to have answered.
Awesome. I'm looking at Tim. He's going to answer this one.
Wow, those are doozies and really awesome questions too. I think I guess the first thing that I'd say is that we've been very aware that there's certain iconic things about her that we don't want to change, and we want that new tone. And as he mentioned, darker, grittier, and sort of those words come to mind. But I think one thing that the cover really captured, which I was excited about, is that when you look at the cover, you still see a Lara Croft there, and so. Something we talk about is that we felt like we needed to modernize the franchise, and even though the 90s Lara had certain things about her that we all came to love and recognize, there's still those same things can be seen in a new light, we think, and we're kind of telling the story of how she became a Tomb Raider, which you really didn't get in the previous one. She kind of started out with all of her abilities and faculties, and sort of she was already there at the apex, and we wanted to kind of start from ground zero and build that up. And again, for a modern generation, we need her to fit in with all the other big franchises out there, and she was fitting in quite well in the 90s, but that kind of hit its peak, and so we want to find all of those things about her that we love and just show them in a new light. That's basically it.
And I think the core thing that we want to make sure fans appreciate is that we're not changing the pillars of what it means to be Tomb Raider or Lara Croft. Ultimately, what we're doing is, and both of you hear me say it more than once when you were here, is making her culturally relevant. We've done a lot of research and study and look at some of those kind of iconic characters throughout all media. I think the two that people would relate to most is Batman and the James Bond and what they've done of recent years. In that, ultimately, the new Batman, the pillars haven't changed for him. He's still a bit of a vigilante. He still becomes Batman. But they just tell the story in a way that people look at it and feel like it's of this generation. It's not of that sort of Adam West old-school generation of how Batman became Batman. I think we're taking a similar slant in that, just making it that Lara is more relevant to today's gamers.
Well, I think that maybe leads in well to something a couple other readers were asking about, which was kind of some more specifics about what Lara Croft herself was going to be like in this game. One of our readers, Philip Wessels, asked if Lara's character evolution, if it if it will end somewhere closer to the classic Lara. In other words, are we going to see some of the iconic sort of ensemble emerge in the game, like her dual pistols or her backpack? And Addison Croft, another reader, asked kind of a similar question. What are Lara's acrobatic capabilities, and how are they going to evolve as the game progresses?
Well, we definitely want to have those memorable moments, iconic moments, but I don't think we're really, we're not ready to talk about the specifics of how the game will end or any of those, which ones of those we're going to actually, show in the actual game. But I think one of the, like I was mentioning before, one of the cool things is that from a character progression perspective, she's going to start off as a sort of, a naive, young, just out of school, ambitious archaeologist who has something to prove, and she's going to progress through the game in this survival situation, and going to be tested time and time again. So we'll return to some of those iconic things that the fans, I think, will love, though we won't talk about those quite yet. But as she goes, she's going to really have a character change that you haven't seen before with this character. And again, before she's had all of her abilities, and so I think on the acrobatic side, we really look back to that survival tone that we've talked about before. That I think she's a physical, very athletic character just by nature. She's also a very intelligent character, but on the athletic side, she's going to have abilities that will allow her to get through all of the predicaments that she's in. But we look back to that survival thing, so there'll be some effort in her her move set. Mm-hmm. She's still physically fit, so she can achieve a lot. But she starts off the game kind of unsure of whether she can really go through this situation. And again, we kind of are going to put her through the meat grinder. So she's she's going to be using her tools. We talked about the pickaxe in the article a little bit, and so that'll be something that she'll be able to utilize from a movement perspective.
Okay. Another specific question about Lara. Damn Nature You Scary asks, who will voice Lara?
At this moment in time, we haven't made the final call. We have gone through dozens upon dozens of different voices, and it is a pretty tough job to try and find that voice that we feel is going to fit a generation. Whoever we choose, obviously, will be with us for a while. So right now, it's all about the experience in the game. I think before we choose the voice, we need to make sure that we have the experience nailed down, and from that, then it's easier to find the right person. But let's just say the search is on, and we have listened to a lot of voices. It's really cool.
Well, we got another guy here, Poseidon7, who asked about with the new Tomb Raider openly embracing an M rating, which is, I think, a quote from our story. Has the studio taken into consideration the impact that this will have on their younger Tomb Raider fans? Which I thought was a kind of an interesting question. I'm sure it's something you guys have thought about.
I think it is definitely. When we made the decision to review the rating that we were going for and the story we were telling, of course, we took a number of key factors into consideration. From fans, from age group, and also retail and TV and advertising times, because it puts a major restriction on what you can and can't do having an M rating. And I think ultimately it boiled down to the experience we were trying to deliver in the game. We had spent a lot of time trying to sort of re-energize the franchise, and in order to do that, we had to tell a true story, one that, as you hear, is gritty, it's a little bit darker, and an M rating was the only way we had to do that. Tomb Raider's been around for an extremely long time, as we all know, like 15 years, and a lot of the fans have grown up with the franchise, and we felt that there was probably a large proportion of people who had now kind of moved out of that T rating into the M rating, and were looking for something a little bit darker. So, of course, there are going to be fans, and there are fans who are still in that T bracket, and unfortunately, we had to make the call. It was about the experience, it was about the future of the franchise, and in order to tell that story, we needed to dip into an M. But what we will say is that we're not going into M for the sake of being M. Mm-hmm. Lara doesn't curse, and she doesn't do and say things just for the sake of doing it. It's all about story and experience. So she won't be dropping the F-bomb too many times, if at all.
I think that's something that fans will be. There's been a divide that I've seen that people are really excited about the M rating, and then other ones who are concerned that the violence would be gratuitous or something in nature. So it's good to hear that that'll be grounded in the narrative and the gameplay.
Yeah, we really want it to be motivated, and again, we're not doing it lightly by any means. It's not any sort of stunt. And I think early on in concept phase, one thing that I was excited about and really wanted to push Crystal to do is to commit to that. Instead of sort of playing the fence and trying to, kind of have our cake and eat it too, if we were going to actually tell this sort of survival story that we've been talking about and the article talks about, that we needed to get into that M space, at least some, so we can actually show what a real human's going to go through to do that. So I was really excited that people were willing to commit to that, rather than kind of play the fence on a teen and try to sort of half do it.
Okay.
And I think in all the research materials that Tim and the team have pulled together and myself to review to try and decide what survival means, there are some incidences that you watch in real life where people have had to make decisions on their own, and no more so than Aaron Ralston, who's a guy we were watching very closely, and Danny Boyle has just made the movie 127 Hours, where that was a story of ultimate survival, and he had to do something that was above and beyond any human would ever want to have to go through. And I think that in itself is more psychological than it is the gore of having to cut your own arm off. And for one, just so we're on the record, Lara will not be cutting her arm off
Get that out there now.
anytime soon.
I tried it. They wouldn't do it.
But it's ultimately, you cannot tell that psychological story and give that experience through just the T rating. You have to be willing to get a little bit darker.
Okay. This is one that you guys probably won't be able to answer right now, but it just at this stage in development. But a lot of people are wondering how many hours of play they can expect from this installment, and that one was from Addison Croft.
Loads. I think there's a benchmark which has to be hit, and I think without a doubt it's the 10-hour benchmark. We're aiming above that. Where we'll come in, we won't know for another few months, but let's just say that it won't be anywhere below 10 hours, that's for sure.
Okay.
Weirdly, we actually had a bunch of questions from people who kind of wanted to know some stuff about the water in the game. We had a user named Lara Fan 25, clearly a great Tomb Raider enthusiast, who wanted to know if Lara's going to be able to swim in the water, how in general she will interact with large pools of water, and whether water was going to have any significant role in the sort of the dynamic puzzles or the kind of problem-solving areas of the game.
Well, I mean, water definitely. One of the things that the article talked about as far as that sort of opening sequence, water, fire, the dynamic nature of the world is a huge goal, and so buoyancy is just a simple example of how it would relate to problem solving, is a big goal of ours. So water's definitely, puts fire out. If you go under a waterfall, objects will float in using our very cool physics system, and you can light those floating objects on fire to sort of solve problems and escape situations. So yeah, water definitely plays a role. The environment in general is huge because the island is, as we like to say, is sort of a character, and so a main character. And so water, rain, and again fire, mud, all of that sort of the natural elements of the island. We want to actually have gameplay purpose and gameplay reasons to be around, so the player can, think about, okay, I'm in this situation. If I were really in this situation, I would use water in this way, and so it'll work that way. That's the goal. So that opening sequence, I think, is a good example of that actually achieving that goal.
So, and in some of the feature sets, we haven't made final decisions on. So the question relating to whether she'd swim or not, to be honest, our primary goal is to make sure the experience rises to the top, and that if the experience isn't good enough for something like swimming right now, that would not be included. So it's all about making sure that if water's going to play a part, it's to our physics, it's through realism, and it makes it all enjoyable.
Okay. Speaking of the island, then, we have another question from Laura Fan 25, which I actually should I think LoraFan 25 is actually a collaborative effort of everyone on the Tomb Raider forums, so we have several questions from them.
Wait a second.
I bet you it's somebody in the studio who hasn't gotten the memo.
So there was a significant amount of questions from LoraFan, and they were very good. LoraFan 25 also wants to know how many diverse regions can we expect on the island, and is the weather going to be dynamic in that it'll affect Laura's objectives and the way she interacts, or is it just kind of something for the mood and tone of the game?
Two-part question. One, we can't at this time talk about the different regions on the island because that's integral to the entire game and campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And we will over time be talking about specific areas and experiences in those areas. Weather plays a huge part in the game. We've spent a lot of time with animators here, the programmers, building into our existing engine to be able to bring something new in terms of realism to Lara and how the elements affect her. So that does play an absolute monstrous effect. And you should see pretty soon when we start talking about the different regions how that affects her. But yeah, we don't go into too much detail. That's kind of one of those secret things.
Yeah.
But it's a big deal for us. It's a big deal for us.
Okay.
Sure. Well, Danny Rex was another reader who brought up kind of a compelling question from a little bit of observation that he did on the official Tomb Raider website. He noticed that there's an Xbox Live and a PS Network logo going on up there, which led him to the question of what kind of online options can he expect? Is there going to be DLC, leaderboards? Is there going to be any sort of multiplayer? Any hints in that direction that you can give to Tomb Raider fans?
I think, again, it's a little bit too early. We have a lot of irons in the fire to make sure that we deliver a unique experience, and one which is tailored to the gaming audience of today. So, of course, as with any game of this stature coming out, there are tons of options to be taken into consideration, and right now we have every single one of them on a big board in our office, and we're ticking the boxes as we go along. But as for specifics at this stage, to be honest, it's too early because, again, with all of the attributes of the game, it has to fit within the experience. If it doesn't fit, we're not going to shoehorn it into that box just for the sake of doing it. Everything has to have a purpose.
All right. We have a string of questions here related to combat, and BMW asks, what sort of enemies are there going to be on the island that Lara Croft will be facing? This is something that we've heard a couple of times across the questions. People want to know who they're taking on.
Yeah, I think again, we're trying to introduce the concept in a particular way. The first one is the focus is on Lara first and foremost. We want people to understand the experience that she's going to go through and the situation that she's in. Over a course of time, we will start to introduce enemies and how you come across and how they set in the environment. But right now, our focus of communication is kind of strictly around Lara and where she is, how she got there, why she's there, all the rest of those questions. So I promise, of course, over time we will start getting into that detail, but right now that'll be giving too much away.
All right, well, I might as well just shoot out
about 50 questions.
A couple of more. LauraFan25 also asks if there's melee combat featured in the game, and then Heartache wanted to know, this is actually one that we heard over and over again, something along twin pistols, but is it possible to use two handguns at the same time?
Again, I shouldn't keep saying again.
That kind of falls into that category. It sounds like for you guys that
it's something you're looking to expand and roll out later.
Yeah, I think we're constantly testing. Like as Tim and I sit in the room that we're in right now, it's actually a closed off room, part of the focus testing, which we showed you. And for the last 6 months, we have had hundreds upon hundreds of people coming through. We're constantly testing systems. We really want to make sure that we nail it. And nothing falls through the cracks. And sometimes that means having stuff in early on that we think is cool, but when you put it in people's hands after 3 or 4 months, it just hasn't got the fun factor. So we're extremely hesitant to commit to talking about specific features at this stage because it's way too far out. But let's just say this is, without a doubt, one of the most tested and most earliest tested games we've ever worked on. And the people who have been in testing are so heavily NDA'd. We don't even want them to leave the studio. We're going to try and keep them here for the next 12 months plus. But as I say, when the game shifts, combat is a big deal for us. As you know, when you were here, we really strive to show you kind of behind the scenes, and both of you will be a little bit more fortunate to see enough to hopefully make you believe that we're willing to take a lot of risks and see what shines through.
Sure. Well, this other arena outside of combat was something that I know you guys you should be able to talk about a little bit more based on what we kind of saw, which was some of the approach to problem solving and puzzles and exploration and that kind of stuff. In particular, we had a reader who goes by the tag "I wish I was Bayonetta," who
awesome.
Who asked. It's been said that the puzzles are going to become part of the survival aspect of the game, so it feels natural and real, rather than the straightforward keys, gears, switches, levers, pressure plates, that kind of stuff of the older games. So he's curious if you could elaborate on what exactly you mean by that. Like how are you thinking it's going to be more organic as opposed to before in the previous games?
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit earlier. I think one of the big keys there is the physics system, and utilizing that as a way to, get sort of the pieces of all of the puzzles and the problem solving and the sort of what we call survival escapes sequences accessible for the player and intuitive to understand. Because, I mean, generally when you're walking down the street, generally everybody understands what physics, gravity, etc., how they work, and so when you're put into a situation where there's a counterweight system, or like I mentioned earlier, buoyancy or fire, or levers or teeter-totters or anything like that appear in the world, that when the player interacts with them, they actually act the way you would expect. And one of the cornerstones of previous games is that it's more of the sort of the machine, the ancient machine metaphor, and so we're moving more toward that raw sort of I'm in the situation, what would I do if I were surviving? And so physics is a huge role, and that's how we kind of intend to make that more natural and flow for the player through their head when they're thinking about how to solve a problem. So I guess that's sort of the general thing. Rope, we have a cool rope system that acts the way you would think it would, and we mentioned water as well playing a big role. So all of those elements that there's been a few games out there that have also utilized physics, and we've been very influenced by those. So rather than a canned thing that just sort of comes from the designer's head in an abstract way, we want it to sort of feel like a real place.
Sure.
And as you remember from when you were out, one of the core things is showing that this island, before Lara arrived on it, was a living, breathing character, and not just as an island, but also the characters that are on it. So Lara finds herself in situations where, an example was the den, where there was a structure already there. It was in place. It had a use for sifting flotsam and boxes and stuff that came in washed, and Lara had to use that to try and find a way, being smart, find a way to use it to help her escape. So it's about her going into situations that the player can feel like, wow, I kind of realize that this might be here for something else, but I might be able to get it to do something else for me, and help me get out of this particular situation through using all those physics-based elements.
The other thing I'd mention too is that because it's physics-based and sort of more of a dynamic world, there's a little bit of variability in how you go about getting out of your situation. So because physics is has that dynamic nature, the player can do one thing in a little bit different order than the other, and it's sort of like however they think about it, it should hopefully work that way, and that's the goal when we go through the designs. Of course, those make the designs extremely difficult as well, because you have to account for a lot of different variations. But that also, I think, will be a better reward for the player. So.
And in all the testing we've done, I can't tell you the amount of times we've done stuff that, because of the physics, we're like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen, but that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah. Hey, bug.
So there's a lot of that. It's like, oh, can we make that work for us?
Yeah.
So, like, with you're talking about some of those kind of like, going for the physics angle of like that unique situation that Lara will find herself in, which I think kind of feeds well into something. Another question that Philip Wessels had, which was about just the namesake itself. I mean, are those physics-based kind of encounters that you're going to be running into, are those going to be in Tombs? Like, the name of the game is still Tomb Raider. Does Tomb Raiding still have a role in Lara's development as a character? He asked, in particular, his wording was kind of amusing. He said, "What makes this Tomb Raider and not Creepy Island Survivor?"
Well, she's still, throughout the entire game, yes, there are tombs, of course, it's Tomb Raider. It's just the situation that she has to go through to get into those tombs and get out of them as quickly as possible is very different to anything that we've had Lara do in the past. So yes, the essence of the name of the game is still there. You still have to raid tombs. It's just a little bit of a different experience. And right now, we're in the test phase of sort of 6 or 7 of those modules, so we can't go into too much detail, but let's just say it's not that much of a departure in terms of you still have to raid tombs, you still have to go and get equipment and stuff to be able to help you survive, but a little bit different from the past where you just pick up a jewel and put it in your backpack and it disappears.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not to throw in an example from a sort of a competing franchise, but in Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, he's in one of the tombs in that, and he crawls up, if you recall, crawls up above and pushes a statue over of Anubis or something. I forget what the statue was, and it crashes through the wall, and that's how he escaped. And that was all physics-based. And so even in tombs, there's still situations where physics will come into play in a very, more raw manner like we were talking about, because she has to get out of there, or she has to accomplish whatever goal she has at the time. So physics can still play a role even in ancient places. So.
Okay. We have a question from Mr. PMS who asks, fitting with the survival theme, how will treating injuries be handled? He brings up the metal spike incident and says that that's not something you're going to just walk off on the real world. So is there anything you can speak to that?
Again, it's putting a real human character, or the feeling of a real human character into those situations. So when Lara gets injured, you will see her injured for a period of time, and that will affect your ability to play in particular ways. So obviously picking up things like health, water, and equipment will help you heal quicker. But I think that the 40,000 foot view is that we are trying to get away from, in some respects, the Teflon-esque feel to Lara Croft of past, where she would fall 20 or 30 feet and then just barrel roll and stand up and move on to the next objective. Those situations are not necessarily real. And in order for us to have a real human character, we have to show that she's injured. We have to show that she shows pain and emotion. A part of the game is not necessarily going around, as we said, picking berries and, constantly looking for water, but certainly medical supplies. She will be injured, and you have to heal that injury, and they'll feel more real.
Yeah, some of those, like that spike that he mentioned, some of those are tonal in nature, but also the team is working on systemic ways to heal and to have sort of things working. That really just add to the whole experience and make we don't want them to just be tonal. We want to have some gameplay in there as well. So they're working on that. We're just, we don't have the details at this point.
Sure. A user Fallen Angel asked a question that is actually something I was pretty interested in about the way you guys are approaching your game here, which is they asked, will the game be divided into missions or stages, as most games are these days, or do you guys have a different sort of structure in mind for the way that the gameplay is kind of put together that way?
It's a good question. I guess we're not going to, as we talked about the different sort of areas on the island, as Carl was saying, we didn't want to divulge any of that stuff. But
sure.
We, I guess the one thing that we can say is that the structure is going to be different from what we've had in the past, and it won't be sort of necessarily level, load screen, level, load screen, level, load screen. We want to give the player a little more options to how they go about doing things, and so yeah, it won't be the traditional Tomb Raider structure for sure, and it won't be the same structure as some of our competitors either.
So you'd say there's maybe a little bit more freedom there to kind of explore. Would that be fair to say? We're trying to be very clear about how that we're not an open world game by any means, but yeah, there definitely are areas in the game that give the player some freedom that we haven't had before. So.
Yeah, I think that's one of the core things that we found over the last month from comments and forums and emails. is that we want to make sure we clarify that you will have freedom and freedom to explore, but it's not an open world game.
Yeah.
We're not going to give you the ability to be able to just go from one side to the other just like that. I know we've had some great experiences with Just Cause 2 in all the development time that we've had as a company, but we're not anything like that. This is very specific areas, freedom, and control.
We still, for that, survival feel, and for her character arc, we still wanted to have enough of control over the pacing of the game and the macro beats, etc. So we wanted to give them some freedom, but we also wanted to have some specific moments happen at certain times for everybody. So, and there are games that use a similar structure out there. We just, we're not that open world thing. And believe me, I'm super excited to talk about it, more, but just can't at this point because I think it's some pretty cool stuff, the way that our world is laid out. So I can't wait to get into it more deeply.
Okay. Our reader Warbuff actually has some questions relating to these scenes we talked about in the article, Laura escaping the den, and the airplane crash scene. So he says the article in GA made it apparent that button prompts to perform actions is a big part of play. QuickTime events generally remind me that I'm playing a game and break immersion. So he wants to know, have the button prompts been implemented in a way to make it feel natural to an action scene, or are we going to be tapping a lot of buttons?
The button prompts are definitely, we're trying to really integrate them in the way that you would just kind of playing the game normally. So all the button prompts, and they're still going through some iteration via playtesting, etc., but all the button prompts are intended to be, if you're supposed to kick something at this point, then you actually use the kick button to do it. If you're supposed to interact with something, you use the interact button. So it's not just abstract sort of Simon Says sort of QuickTime events at all. We want to try to stay away from that. We want to really, the goal is to sort of get the player to feel what the character is feeling as much as possible. So and so some of the screenshots that were in the article and stuff, some of that might be iterated on in the future. But for the most part, most of those are things that you would actually, the button you would press if you were playing the game naturally. It's just these events give us the ability to craft the camera in a very specific way. Have very specific timing and voice lines and everything play out in a more cinematic fashion, but then still give the player interactivity. So we feel like that's a better option than just having them watch a cutscene. So we just want to have all the interactions be what they would normally do in that situation. It's just crafted.
And the guys are working extremely hard to make it instead of just having those QuickTime events that you really do feel like you're participating. That you remember the airplane slide where we could have easily have just had Lara sliding down the side of a hill and you just watch it happen and press a button at the end. Now we give you full control on this consequence. If you move too far, too fast, you can get yourself into trouble. So it feels like you're participating more than just watching, which is really core to the essence of what we're trying to achieve.
Carl brings up to speak to the slide really quickly. One thing that may not come to people's mind when they read up on it right away is that the interesting thing about the slide is that it's a fully analog sort of big event. And in past games, for instance, slides have been sort of all 45-degree angles and very sort of specific the way that their parameters are, but for that slide in specific, it's fully analog. You have control over the whole time. You're sort of slaloming down the hill and dodging stuff. And at least for me, I think that's pretty exciting that our movement system allows for that now, as opposed to the more canned sort of motions like that.
Sure. And I think the escape sequence, where I'm sure some people are relating to the screenshots where you see the left and right trigger prompts. Again, it's about putting the player as much into that situation as possible. Rather than button pressing, you're using the triggers in that instance to go hand over hand to try and escape, up along this path, this tunnel where the sunlight's shining through, and it really helps immerse the player into the feeling of I'm getting close, I got to go faster, and then a couple of little events where you got to try and avoid rocks. And again, it boils down to it's not about just putting one button in where you just keep hitting the same button. It's about really immersing the player into the experience.
Sure. Well, one thing in our cover story that we had in our little bullets at the beginning of the story was the fact that we have a release date window thing in there, and we had TBA, I think is what we ended up putting in there. And so I know you guys aren't necessarily narrowed down yet to exactly when you're going to release, but January Snow, another of our readers, Was curious about how long you guys have been working on it, and in what stage of development the game is at this point.
So one thing we don't normally go into is how long. I think we've gone through a major kind of step back as a studio to reevaluate the franchise. You can see we wanted to be a little bit creative. We did things like Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light. We've done some work in the initial stages of pushing our engine above and beyond anything that we've ever done before. So some of the time was spent on that. And really now, I suppose we're open to say that we're at that kind of vertical slice stage of testing mechanics and pillars and pulling everything together. So if somebody out there can deduce when we're going to be shipping just from that information, you should come work for us. But no, we won't be announcing anything until certainly mid next year. I think again it boils down to experience. We're not going to release a game half baked, and because it's a whole new experience and we're trying to redevelop the character. These things take time. They don't happen overnight, as everybody knows, and we want to make sure we get it right. When this comes out, we want the experience to be 100%.
Yeah, one thing I'll say that I think I mentioned in another interview that when we talked before is that I was very impressed with Crystal's willingness to give the game a good incubation and pre-production time. So we won't talk specifics, but they did commit. They put their money where their mouth was, and we had time to really let things cook. Through pre-production, and I was one of the first people on the project as a creative director, and then when we hit pre-production, I moved into the new role. But I was impressive to see a studio devote themselves to a project like that. So.
Well, you guys, I know that you touched briefly, you mentioned the engine in your past answer. So Megalith was wondering, do you have a completely new engine this time, or is it just an updated version of the Underworld engine? And then Heartache asks, are the cutscenes pre-rendered or in-game?
So let's do engine first.
Mm-hmm.
Engine, it's actually our Legend engine, which amazingly enough is the same engine that built Legend and Underworld. The only difference now is that we've brought in 20 magicians who literally sit there rebuilding it from the ground up, and have done some phenomenal things with it. So no, it's the exact same engine. I think people will be hugely surprised to see what we've done with it. And then cutscenes, do you want to answer that?
I think nearly all of the cutscenes are going to be, in-game rendered. I guess we might have some pre-rendered stuff, but I think some of that is still going to be discussed, and we'll figure out. But the thing is that the screenshots that were in the article are the game. I mean, it looks amazing, and I was pretty impressed with the team to be able to send screenshots out that look that great. And so I think the cinematics are going to be fine as is. Personally, I think we'll still get all the emotion across, but and as we talked about, we do full mocap with multiple actors and voice all at once for the cinematics. So the performance should be up to par, if not better than stuff that we've seen out there.
And we'll over the next few months, and that we'll be talking about some of the unique sort of new technological advances that we're using in mocapping. We won't do it just yet because that's actually a pretty cool thing to talk about. So we find the right time. But I think you've seen some of that in some of the tests that we showed you. Well, yeah, we were, and I think that the day after the cover went out, I tweeted that they were actually screenshots from in-game, and that was the first thing to get picked up and went everywhere. I know a lot of people couldn't believe it, but yes, they are screenshots.
Yeah, there was definitely some reassuring that had to go on that I saw. People like, no, really, really.
There was even a shocking moment for me when I was looking. I was like, wow, that was freaking amazing.
I know. I think I had to sit here I think we had the art director sat in here one night. I think he did like a 36-hour straight session of capturing screens for me, and we sat and went through every single one of them. It was hundreds upon hundreds, and I cannot tell you how hard it was to get down to the number that you requested for the cover story, because there was so many put aside. So we're looking forward to releasing them over a large period of time. But yeah, most of those files were well above the 50 megabyte mark by the time we actually finished with them. It was great to be able to have such a great choice. It really was.
Well, we have one last question for you, actually, and this is one that this is probably the most popular question that I've heard anywhere, comments, forums, anything. Amor Guy asks, when will we get to see the first trailer or gameplay footage of Tomb Raider? Because that's what they want.
The Holy Grail.
I was sitting there last night reviewing some of the latest passes on sections of the trailer, and I was actually going to tweet it to say how awesome it is. I was working and doing some fun revisions, but we are, let's see, we're not that far away from it, but what I do want to make sure is obviously it portrays the right emotion and experience and really sets up the story of this new Tomb Raider. So I hate using the sentence, it'll be ready when it's ready, but there's a lot of time gone into this so far, and Megan, you were with me when we were in Japan, and we saw behind the scenes what was happening, so you will be one of the first to be presenting it to the world, no doubt, and hopefully it'll be very soon. But it's exciting. I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah, I think that we would be massacred if we didn't ask that question, though. It's funny how much people they're just very, very excited to see Lara in action for the first time, as we all are. So.
Yeah, and I think again, the goal for this first part of the campaign is to introduce you to this new character. So we've been very specific in the stories that we tell at the beginning of this campaign. So expect them to be about Lara and about how she's ended up in this situation.
All right, great. I think that we got through a sizable number of questions. That was impressive.
I think we covered a bunch of them. So sorry to folks who we didn't get a chance to throw the questions out there, but hopefully there's some other good information in there for you.
Definitely.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
I'm constantly trying to reply to people's tweets and questions, so hopefully if you don't get replies from us, you know it's a touchy question.
Cool. Thanks for your time, guys. We really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Matt.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Thank
Bye.
you all. Bye-bye.